Um, Good morning again. I am Saksham Nijavan from Forum for the Future, but I also represent the Responsible Energy Initiative. We are very happy to host all of you for the first Responsible Renewable Energy Summit. We're humbled by the turnout today. It's, like I said, it's always a great problem to have when you've got a lot of people because there's a lot to learn today. And I hope you will find the discussions today insightful and inspiring. Before we begin, may I please request you to put your mobile phones on silent if you haven't. Just take 10 seconds to just check if your mobile phones are on silent. If you would like to take a phone call, please go to the back side and behind the doors, and there's a lot of space for you to take your phone calls. Please feel free to do so if you've got urgent work. We've confirmed with the venue team, there are no fire drills planned for today. So if you hear a fire alarm, follow the fire exit signs towards the fire exit doors. There is an open area towards the right side if you face the back, where the lunch will be served. That's another area for you to gather in case there is a fire alarm as well. If there's any other emergency, we've got the organizing team, or you can contact the venue team, being led by Rajendra. There is an ambulance on call here 24/7. So just in case there's an emergency, please let us know as well. Moving on to the summit today. In the summit today, we will have 3 panel discussions and a few keynote speeches as well. We will start with a welcome note and an expert note, and then we'll move on to the first panel discussion that focuses on the role of investment in driving responsible renewable energy and raising the ambition of the sector. After the first panel discussion, we will have the keynote speech from Mr. Rajnath Ram from Niti Aayog around 12 o'clock. And then we'll move on to the second panel discussion that will discuss how do we site renewable energy in a more responsible manner on low impact siting and responsible land use as well. Lunch will be served around 1:30 p.m. We'll have a full hour for all of us to have lunch and network with each other. And we've got something really exciting in store for you during lunch as well. Post-lunch, we will have the third panel discussion that will explore how we might embed circularity in the renewable energy sector as it's growing. I hope you'll stay here for the entire duration. Each of the discussions, each of the speeches will bring a unique perspective to the incredibly promising and rapidly growing RE sector here. I'm sure all of us are proponents of renewable energy. I'm sure all of us want to see India decarbonize and be on a low carbon economy pathway. And our effort here is to ensure that it is done in a responsible manner and that we can set a benchmark together as the RE sector. In the conference today, we are actively trying to reduce the waste we generate through this summit. Hence, you will not see any flex or single-use plastics. Please use the QR codes on your table to scan, and it will take you to a folder that has the agenda and some reading materials. But if you've registered, we'll also make sure we'll send these to you over email afterwards as well. With that, I would now like to invite Dr. Annapurna Vancheswaran for the opening address. Dr. Annapurna is the Managing Director of the Nature Conservancy, India. Over the last 30 years, Dr. Annapurna has worked extensively in sustainable development and climate change, and has built numerous strategic partnerships that are driving climate action. She's worked in various capacities with international, national, and subnational governments, private sector, and community organizations on ground. Dr. Annapurna, I'd like to welcome you to the stage now.
Thank you so much, Saksham. And I think now I need to know that I should not let my colleagues in my office to give you a CV of mine. So, but I am delighted. He said it would be the opening address, but I would like to welcome you all to this first Renewable Energy Summit, and glad to have you all join us this morning. I see a lot of young faces, and I think I'm delighted to see these young faces because you are the future that we are all talking about, and we will be discussing the entire day today. Why is responsible renewable energy so important? Well, when we hear from the set of experts today which have been gathered, and I'm so glad to see some of the people that I know from the energy sector. It's been delightful that we are all connecting after a little bit of COVID times and times when I was detached. So I'm really happy and delighted to be here. But we are, as Saksham talked about, the panel discussions, they are so full of information that I think the young minds who are sitting at the back would definitely enjoy looking at it. But before I welcome you all, but I would also like to thank Forum for the Future, Vasudha Foundation, the National Solar Energy Federation of India, Climate Trends, and of course, my organization, the Nature Conservancy, to have managed to have set up this platform today for all of us. The key questions in the panel discussions the summit will attempt to explore are: how do we ensure the development of RE to be in sync with the environment and social well-being? The Nature Conservancy looks at nature and people together, so this is a very important aspect for us as we move ahead. Will renewable energy support natural ecosystems, thereby building resilient communities, is again something the panel would be looking at. How do we embed circularity? Because when you look at renewable energy, you also see that how do we see that the value chains move ahead in a manner which is sustainable as India forges ahead and has an ambition of its own? And how do we ensure investments are equitable in this system? So these were the three-pronged strategy that was planned for, and I hope we will have answers at the end of the day for us to move forward. As Saksham mentioned to us, the Responsible Energy Initiative, it is a consortium involving institutions like the Forum for the Future, Terry, whom I've known and I've been with them for 3 decades, the WWF, WRI, and of course, Business and Human Rights Resource Center. And all of them seek all the above that we are going to be discussing today. But scaling renewable energy is critical for this country. We all know, there is no doubt about it. We aim to transition to a low carbon economy and becoming net zero by 2070. That's our ambition. Hence, the transition from renewable energy to responsible energy is the key as we move ahead. As we know, the conflict between land and green energy has become evident, but the good news, we do have good news here, that there are options and solutions available for us. And as very clearly we say that a TNC study that suggested that degraded wasteland with low biodiversity and livelihood value and converted lands across India has a potential for almost 4 times the RE target that we have, which is 500 gigawatts. And this commitment that was there in COP26 can very easily be realized. So we have solutions with us. I don't know, many of you would be aware of the Site Right tool that the TNC has developed, where it is created to identify areas where solar and wind development is less likely to encounter social and ecological conflicts. So we already have a tool with us which can make this, which can provide impetus to all the work that we aim. The need of the hour is in developing and adapting innovative technologies to minimize the impact of renewable energy projects on land use. We have an opportunity again in hand in repurposing land. So we do have solutions with us. The redevelopment and repurposing of abandoned mining lands for renewable energy development is an example. I would not go into figures because I have experts here, but as it said, that even if we use 30% of this land which can be repurposed, which can be done very easily, we can get about 25 to 30 gigawatts of solar energy by 2030. So that's again something that we should look and ponder about. Thus, prioritizing these low impact land parcels for RE development would need the necessary impetus by thought leadership that is in this room, by governments, both center and the state, and international institutions. And hence, I think it is important that this summit manages to, and I hope at the end of it, it manages to come out with a call of action in building India, which is powered by clean and green energy, and also ensuring that there is a thriving biodiversity in the country with harmony of people and nature. With this, may I welcome you all again, and I look forward to a very exciting deliberation the entire day. Thank you, Saksham.
Thank you, Dr. Annapurna, for sharing your perspective, for setting the ambition for the day, and for also speaking about the opportunity and the need for responsible land use as part of RE development. I would now like to welcome Bharath Jairaj, who is the Executive Director Initiative Team. Bharath leads the energy program at WRI in India, which seeks to inform and catalyze India's transition to clean energy. He also leads WRI's energy governance practice, which focuses on the intersection of energy, governance, and socio-economic development. Bharath has also recently been appointed to the UNDP's Global Advisory Group on Energy Governance. Bharath, over to you, and I'll welcome you.
Thank you, Saksham. Thank you, Annapurna, for your welcome. My God, this room has gotten smaller, I think. It was a tough one. We had to pick this date. It was a lot of people told us they had other things to do today, so we tried our best. We got the hall name changed, just so you can feel like it's a little bit connected with February 14th. But thank you all for coming today, this morning, and hopefully you'll stay till the end of the day. This is first Responsible Renewable Energy Summit. The initiative itself, we've heard Saksham talk about, is now 3.5 years old. It was aimed as a multi-year program. Be as a sector. The idea is to ensure that renewable energy in India achieves its full potential and creates value in a way that is ecologically safe, respects rights, and is socially just. And this collaborative initiative, again, we've economize and only put up 4. If you were to click it, opens up to 10 logos. The idea is that that's the kind of challenge we're trying to deal with. No one organization, no one entity, no one country can solve this. It's going to need collaboration, and across just think tanks and so on. It's going to need private sector, it's going to need investors, it's going to need governments to step up. And I'm grateful that we already have, we have benefited as the Responsible Energy Initiative. There's an initial cohort of about 25 renewable energy companies and investors and so on who've stepped up. We've also have what we call equity voices. These are professionals, some of them working in civil society organizations or researchers who've also volunteered their time to try and make this a really robust and informed and inclusive community. Now, we all know we all know of India's high renewable energy targets. From the 20 gigawatts by 2020, that was our original goal, right? We thought 20 gigawatts by 2020 itself seemed daunting at a certain point. And quickly it was increased to 175 gigawatts by end of 22. Now, we've pushed all those ambitions aside, and we are aiming at 450, 500 gigawatts by the end of 2030. The recent budget announcements with a focus on green growth, and especially the budget allocation for battery storage and other aspects of the energy transition, continue to address some of these different pieces that are going to be necessary for India to move towards the energy transition. But let's not kid ourselves. This transition is not going to be easy. No transition is linear. We will see ourselves take a few steps forward, some steps back, some steps to the side, and so on. That's the nature of transitions. And unfortunately, there is no playbook. There is no one playbook that somebody else has done that we just have to take and copy. We will all need to find our own ways through this transition. But the destination is clear, the targets are clear, and the journey is well underway. Now, importantly, the rise of renewable energy has brought great hope for our ability to address climate change. India's climate strategy is significantly an energy strategy, and the transition away from high fossil fuel dependence clearly brings substantial benefits, not just in terms of reducing emissions, but also in terms of energy security. And though these benefits are substantial, virtually no sector is yet universally sustainable in its impact. Some years ago, we started noticing that the renewable energy sector was actually far less developed than other sectors in managing environmental and social impacts that they caused across the value chain. Now, as organizations interested in the energy transition, we were also concerned if we should highlight this. We should talk about this too much. If we talked about this, would it actually cause the sector to slow down, right? Would it actually add fuel to the fossil fuel sector, right? These are questions we had. But very quickly, we realized and acknowledged the larger responsibility that we have, that we needed to ask these questions because there's real opportunity of doing this right. So while the sector grows, it must adopt environmental and social safeguards. After all, renewable energy is and will continue to be very important for the future of this country and the globe. So with our co-partners, TERI and Forum for the Future, we established the Responsible Energy Initiative to begin a more serious conversation around these issues. And very quickly, more partners came on board. And in February 2021, we published a report titled Renewable Energy to Responsible Energy. We said RE should not just stand for renewable energy, it must stand for responsible energy. And this report, which was published along with WWF India and Landesa, provided evidence and examples where renewable energy produced low carbon energy, but it had also and was causing significant land, water use impacts, had significant implications on forests, biodiversity, as well as on labor and human rights. Several of these impacts are complex and importantly are not restricted to the renewable energy sector alone. But instead of seeing this as a limiting factor, we saw this as an opportunity for the renewable energy sector to take the lead. And indeed, through the course of this work over the last 3 years, several renewable energy sector leaders, investors in these companies, other stakeholders, have agreed that it is now time to move away from the sort of reactive stance that sectors tend to take on these issues to a more proactive stance that systematically identifies and manages social and environmental impacts. Now, without addressing these, the sector is at risk of creating a constituency of people and communities who are not in support of this sector. Not because they don't want India to go down the road of clean energy or to transition to a clean energy future, but because the way we are going about it is causing irretrievable damage to their lives, their livelihoods, and the ecosystems they live in. And that's why it's very important for us to prioritize the way we go about the energy transition. So to take us one step further, after the report, we along with this cohort of 25 plus renewable energy companies and investors, researchers, and so on, we developed a set of principles, what we call the Renewable Energy Initiative Principles, and these were launched last year. The principles are pretty straightforward. The first one talks about protecting, restoring, and nurturing resilient, thriving ecological systems. I think Dr. Annapurna also alluded to this. The second principle is around resilient communities, and the third is around promoting universal labor, land, and human rights. And the fourth is a commitment to participatory governance. Now, these may sound like, motherhood and apple pie kind of lofty universal values, but that's what we need. That's what we need to set us for ourselves as a sector to move forward. Because for this energy transition to succeed, we will need to ensure it is socially just and environmentally benign and inclusive. And over the past few months, we have attempted to convert these principles into specific pilot projects. So what does this mean, inclusive workforce? What does this mean, thriving ecological systems, right? What does that actually mean when you try and implement it in a renewable energy project? So over these last few months, we've identified some of these pilots, and my colleague Anna from Forum will talk a bit more about this. Because these are not just goals that we should aspire for, these must become the way we will, the way the sector grows. And these are actions that we should be able to show others and how they can be implemented and scaled. You heard, again, Dr. Annapurna just briefly talk about Site Right. This is one of those tools that can help get the renewable energy sector to be located in the more appropriate areas. I want to highlight three more points before I close that we must address collectively. The first is on the circularity question, circularity in renewable energy systems and value chains. In renewable energy systems, when we use the word renewable, what we mean is the fuel. Only the fuel is renewable, not the rest of the energy system. And we know already a significant number of materials and minerals that are going to be needed for India's renewable energy growth as we think of going from where we are to 450 or 500 gigawatts. And then there's the issue of waste generated. After these products are used, all of them have specific lifespans, and so the issue of waste, recycling, so on and so forth. Not just for solar panels and windmills, but also for batteries and other storage technologies that will be needed to be deployed alongside for the energy transition to truly happen. So that is a sort of very important question. The second is on accountability and participatory governance. Now, currently, renewable energy projects are exempt from very basic environmental and social impact assessment regimes that apply to other energy projects, to other infrastructure projects. Now, while this may have been necessary when the sector was in its nascent stage, perhaps this is the time for us to review it and to see if at least the mature technologies that are around us, those that have achieved grid parity and so on, that it's a time for us to design and develop appropriate regimes to ensure we study these impacts. The advantage of an environmental impact assessment or social impact assessment or those types of tools is that it helps you identify upfront what potential impacts there may be, and then you design ways to minimize it and mitigate it upfront, not wait for it to happen on the ground. Also importantly, how can we create spaces and venues for people who are likely to be adversely impacted by these projects to be able to voice their concerns? And finally, on distributive equity, how can we make sure there's fairness in the distribution of costs and benefits of the energy transition? Specifically, how do we socialize the benefits but not the costs? So everyone should benefit from the energy transition, but the costs should not be disproportionately levied on the poor. Now, these are important questions, and I know that we already have a sort of packed panel. I'm hoping that some of the panelists will focus or at least touch on these issues. Today, we have a galaxy of experts, and I'm pretty keen for us to get on with that part. But let me use this opportunity to also invite those of you who are sort of new to the Responsible Energy Initiative efforts and just say that if you have ideas, you want to come on board, please let us know. We are very keen to expand and grow this consortium, this collaboration. And I can also tell you that over the coming months, this is going to significantly gain prominence, including at the next COP 28, because these are the issues of today. And as countries are transitioning to clean energy, transitioning to higher renewable energy, we will need to get ahead of this. And I'm really glad that in India, given India's this coincidentally India's sort of presidency of the G20 and the CEM and so on, that in India we also have a head start with the Responsible Energy Initiative. And I hope we can all collectively work together and create and support a responsible renewable energy sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Bharath, for speaking more about what we mean by responsibility and responsible renewable energy. I also wanted to quickly add, in May last year, we as a group launched what we call the vision and principles for responsible renewable energy. You might find a copy at the back at the registration desk. We had limited physical copies, but if you haven't had a copy, we'll make sure we'll send it to you over email. Please do read through to see the vision that we have set for the sector together with about 30 organizations, and what principles do we need to follow as the sector grows as well. I would now like to invite the panelists for the first panel discussion. I'm quite excited to welcome them. I'd like to invite Ritu, Swami, Bhargavi, Puneet, Vivek, Subramaniam to the stage. Kirti, if you wanted to keep the name tags. If you folks want to take your seats here, I'll quickly introduce the moderator. This panel discussion will explore the role of investment and finance, a very important tool in driving renewable energy, and supporting the RE sector to set a benchmark in terms of the value it creates for everyone, beyond shareholders, beyond the immediate companies, for each and every citizen as well. The panel will be moderated by Ritu Kumar, who is a senior director at TPG. Ritu has deep expertise in environmental economics, global ESG, and has donned many hats in the investment space through UNIDO, development finance institutions, global investment committees, and private equity firms. In the panel discussion today, in this particular panel, we might not have space for questions from the audience, but please feel free to reach out to them and speak to them afterwards over lunch.
Thank you, Saksham. Thank you to Forum, to WRI, to the other Vasudha Foundation and the other organizers. Not only for today, but for your patience over the last couple of years in bringing this forum to life. I know it's been a pretty long journey, but I think it's worth it. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for inviting me and the panelists we have today to talk about how investment and ESG can work together to make this sector more responsible than it currently is. I'm not going to repeat what Annapurna and Bharath have said, because I think they've laid out some of the issues in a very clear and succinct manner. I just want to say that, my firm, TPG, which is a global private equity investor, investing in different parts of the world, including the US, EU, India, Southeast Asia, we face the same issues. We are an impact investor. We have a $7 billion climate fund that we are deploying across the globe. And the issues that Bharath has mentioned today are pretty much common in almost every country. When I started working with TPG, realized that it's not just, in the emerging markets or India that we face, challenges on how to work any sector in a more responsible manner. We have the same issues in the US. We have a few investments in this sector. in the renewable energy sector there. And we have, issues relating to community tensions with local communities who bear the brunt of environmental impacts. But there are two challenges in this sector that I want to highlight, which have been referred to before, but which I think, to my mind, are really germane to the sustainability of the renewable energy sector. One of them is issues around supply chains. We know, especially in the solar sector, which is growing so fast in India and across the world, we know that there has been a lot of attention and focus on supply chains and human rights issues and abuses. And a lot of this stems from the fact that, the supply chain suppliers are based in China, and a lot of the modules come from China, the solar modules come from China, and the polysilicon comes in the value chain comes from regions in the Xinjiang province, which have been targeted by civil society organizations and others for human rights abuses, forced labor issues. And this has become a major, major issue across the world. Governments have reacted in different ways. The US has come up with regulation. They have banned imports from suppliers from China that have been exposed to forced labor. We have the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, the ban is a penalty, but at the same time, the US government has come out with the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides an incentive for local manufacture, which is free from human rights abuses, forced labor, etc. So that is one issue, which I think is also pertinent to India. We have in India, we are also sourcing from China, but I think the challenge is how do we come up with alternative suppliers that are clean in this sense, not just green, but also clean in the social sense. The other issue, which again has been, which Bharath has referred to, is how do we make this transition just? And I think that is really, really important for India, How do we ensure that nobody is left behind? Green is not always clean, is what I'm saying, So we do, and Annapurna mentioned, that some of the old mining sites should be rehabilitated and used for solar. But my question really, and this is something I'd like to ask all the panelists also to address as they make their comments, is how do we ensure that we don't create stranded assets, we don't create stranded workers? Because in this process of decarbonization, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Those who are working in the fossil fuel sector or in carbon-intensive industries, they might be made redundant, they might lose jobs. So how do we re-engage and retrain them so that the transition becomes, the decarbonization transition is just and equitable? And these are, as I said, challenges that we are facing across the different geographies that we work in. So it's not just unique to India, but I think they are extremely important. So with that, I am going to ask, first of all, our panelists to please introduce themselves with just a quick remarks on, their backgrounds, what they're doing. And then I have a few questions that I would like to put to each of them. But maybe we can just start with my colleague at the end there, Shubha. Is that Shubha?
Yeah. Very good morning to all of you, and apologies for the delay in arriving, but I am Subramaniam Pulipaka. I am the CEO of National Solar Energy Federation of India. We are India's largest umbrella body for solar energy companies, and predominantly the policy advocacy body for representing India's solar energy interests. We represent about 145 solar companies throughout the value chain of developers, manufacturers, system integrators, and overall they account to 95% of India's solar market. Personally, as a federation and in my role as CEO, we have been taking a lot of initiatives, not only to address just transition, but also making it more responsible. And throughout the course of discussion, I'll be outlining some of them.
Thank you, Ritu, and good morning, everybody. I'm Vivek Adhya, work in the climate and sustainability practice at the Boston Consulting Group. I've been in this space over the last 18 years now, and my first entrance into climate or sustainability came in from a responsible investment point of view, where I was managing a solid waste management plant for the city of Kolhapur and got carbon credits and got that investment to really set the path here. Thank you again, Forum and other partners, colleagues, for having me here, and we'll try and share the perspectives. We've been working very closely with a lot of investors on ESG, on responsible investing, so we'll try and share a few insights.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Bhargavi. Yeah, I'm Bhargavi, and I'm an independent researcher and educator. I'm also a trustee of an NGO called Environment Support Group in Bangalore. I come with a background in environmental science, botany, aerobiology, journalism, and I work at the intersection of community action with law and policy and governance. I've been following solar parks for the last 1.5 decades. I've been watching the Pavagada solar park since its inception, and I've also been part of the fact-finding committee on the Mikirbamani solar park in Assam, and I've also studied a couple of other solar parks, thanks to Saksham, Bharath, and others, because I've been part of this journey since its inception here too. Probably have met many of you during a couple of meetings earlier. Happy to be here and share my thoughts. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Nagasimha Swami. I'm the ESG manager at BII, British International Investments, for the South Asia region. So the interest for me here is I work closely with renewable energy developers, and BII is a developmental financial institution of the UK government. So the kind of standards what we expect from a renewable energy developer are at times quite steep. That's how it has been seen, given the dilution or given the leniency what has been taken regulatorily for the E&S standards for renewable energy developer. So that's where my work involves picking up with the issues which have been kind of set aside or not been looked into very seriously by the renewable energy developers, and making them aware and working along with them to achieve the best-in-class standards, which looks into all aspects of environment and the social risks. And with that brief, I would like to put my 2 cents over here through this panel, and thanks for the Responsible Energy Initiative for inviting me. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. I am Puneet Rustagi from NIF. NIF is an institutional investing platform anchored by the Government of India and other large institutional investors across the world. I lead the clean energy investments and digital infra investments for them. So we've been actively involved in this sector, almost since our inception. And personally, I've been kind of working in this sector for almost like 14, 15 years now, since the National Solar Mission kind of came out. And really look forward to this session, learning from the fellow panelists and also sharing my insights.
Thank you. So as you've seen, we have a nice mix of people with different backgrounds, ESG investors and Bhargavi, who is from the civil society governance side. So I'm going to now just ask each of them a couple of questions, and hopefully there might be time for us to take a few questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with Swami. Swami, his background is more on the sort of technical ESG side. And given the topic of the day, I just want to ask Swami, what, in your experience, what has been the role, and an honest answer please, what has been the role of ESG professionals in driving this agenda of responsible investing in renewable energy? You know, how do you see yourself interacting with your investment colleagues? And what sort of pushbacks you face, or what, you know, or not, for that matter?
Thanks, Ritu, for that. Just to set a bit of a context to this is that World Economic Forum has, in its latest report 2023, has around E&S risk as the dominant risk, which is coming over the short term and over the next 10 years. So that is the context what we are looking at, and around 2030 is where we would be hitting some of the tipping points where reversing back from the climate impact would be impossible. And given the whole responses towards the addressing climate change and the E&S assets which are going to hit around 53 trillion by 2025, I think that sets a very good background and a very good context and a reason for the ESG professionals here in this room to start acting or start delivering on their mission or on their passion for which they have picked up this field. Having been in this field for the past 25 years, I have seen how E&S has evolved as a subject, as a risk, as an opportunity. So early were the days when it was only EHS, and then we moved on to sustainability and the whole bandwagon of disclosures around sustainability reporting, and then we had standards, and now everything is ESG. But the continued positioning of Indian government towards climate change response has been very overwhelming, and that will shape the things to come, and that will shape the policies, regulations, as well as the guidelines. So that creates a very good leverage which is required for the ESG professionals to start putting their thoughts into proportionate risk-based implementable actions. So that's where ESG professionals should be very happy to be in the current scenario where it is backed up by the India's or the government's whole policy and the thought process. So equally is the global movement to address the climate change risk. And when it comes to the investment, yes, the fight still continues, but you may not be required to fight the battles which I fought back, because the resistance has slowly reduced, the denial has been reduced to a greater extent, and they also understand the plus points and the opportunity side of addressing climate change risk. And that's where you are in a better position in this current scenario, wherein you can deliver on your passion. The other thing is very important is to cut through the shades of green, which is very important, because a lot of disclosures have come around, and these disclosures are actually pushing companies or organizations to pick up something which may not be the greenest, or which may not actually address the whole life cycle risk of any given sector. So that's where cutting through the shades of green and addressing and looking at a business activity through its life cycle approach is a must. Yeah.
Thank you, Swami. So hope there, and also a word of caution about greenwashing, because there's a lot of that happening as well, as we know. So thank you for that. So let me now turn to an investor, to Puneet. So, you know, just from a purely investment perspective, what do you think is the main challenge that you in NIF or just generally face in ensuring that, you know, the returns that you get, which are very attractive now, the returns from investing in renewable energy, are also balanced by doing it in a responsible manner? What are the key challenges you face, having heard about what Swami has just said as well?
See, I think, interestingly, I think when we were setting up NIF, ESG was one of the, like, we kind of, you know, consciously decided that ESG is going to be one of the cornerstones of the institution. So, you know, in terms of our philosophy, I think we've always kept it front and center. I think the key challenge, and you know, it's also been a perception that some of these things, you know, when you try to do them responsibly, cost a lot. They actually don't. You know, if you were to kind of just look at this purely on a return basis, it's not a lot of money. Yes, you know, and I'll come to one of the points, you know, which was raised earlier by you, Ritu, on the supply chain, which is a more fundamental, I would say, industry-wide issue, and it would take more than for, you know, someone like us, or, you know, it's a more collective effort, which would be required to kind of mitigate that piece. But otherwise, you know, just kind of doing this, you know, either at the community level or any of the other things, I don't see a lot of challenge. The other piece is more a attitude change. You know, a lot of these people, you know, at our platforms are really people who've had this mindset of infrastructure development. For them, ESG is still a more tick in the box. I think embedding that culture has been, you know, to some extent, you know, been a challenge. It takes time, you know, for them to kind of think about that more subconsciously. Till now, it's been more a compliance activity, you know, okay, this is what needs to be done. But really, you know, kind of looking at it in that sense that, okay, safety does matter, okay, or we need to, you know, ensure that this thing needs to be done in the right manner, you know, taking care of the biodiversity, you know, for any local site or any of those things. So it's taken time, but it's getting there. The supply chain, of course, has been a big challenge. You know, to be honest, I don't think it's going to get solved, at least in the next 5-7 years. There is a very, very large dependence on China. I think all of us can claim that we can essentially mitigate this issue, but globally, you know, just from the polysilicon refining piece of itself, you know, 80-85% of the market is controlled by China. So you can make everything else out there in the supply chain, but the polysilicon is going to come from those places. The government has been doing a lot. The PLI initiative, the production-linked incentive is one step in that action. It's going to take some time to fructify that on the ground, but it's still some years away.
Yeah. So can I just follow up on that issue? You mentioned briefly that, you know, the sector needs to work together to address this, I think, a very important issue. Are there any initiatives in India that have started, you know, sector-wide? And maybe, you know, our colleague from the Solar Federation can also address this when we come to you. But, you know, is there any activity now that is, I'm not talking about government intervention, but just as a sector, voluntary initiatives that can be sort of promoted?
So see, it's still, you know, there is of course a collective effort, you know, around the Solar Power Developers Association, which is a collective of all the developers which are trying to work through this issue. But you know, it's been difficult to kind of transition. One possible solution has been at least to partly mitigate by setting up facilities in India for the local manufacturing, for the domestic manufacturing. But that's still only, you know, with cells and modules. As I suggested, right, the polysilicon refining, the wafer manufacturing still continues to be something where we are dependent on China. The next few years, some of the larger players in the country today are taking up those things. Hopefully in the next 3 to 4 years, we will see some integration, you know, from a supply chain perspective within India itself.
Let me then actually ask Subbu to maybe address that question, and then I'll ask a couple of others.
Yeah, thank you very much. And building on what Mr. Rustagi said, I think for any sector, if you look at it, the policy and the implementation part evolves as the sector grows. 10 years before, our installed capacity was less than 1.5 gigawatt. Today we are sitting at 64.2 gigawatt, and if things go well, 1 year from now I'll cross 80 gigawatt. So this 80 gigawatt of installations have taught us a lot on how we face these challenges when we go on ground. Starting from the supply chain issues, if I start addressing one by one, there was a point where we were the third largest exporter of modules and cells. Today we are the largest importer. We have less than 1% of cell manufacturing in the world and less than 1.5% of module manufacturing in the world. But now PLI is in place, and if things go right with both PLIs, we are projected to add at least 65 gigawatt of direct module manufacturing capacity end to end, from cell, wafer, ingot and polysilicon by the end of 2025-2026. So this is a good step towards achieving self-reliance, sustainability, as well as decreasing our import dependency while leading to our energy security. But on the implementation side, when we look at it, it has always been a road filled with challenges. I don't need to introduce the concept of or the story of the Great Indian Bustard to the crowd, and if you don't know about it, then it's all over the news. You can go and read it. We spent almost 3 years. I personally feel I am more attached to the bird than I'm attached to the sector now. So these are the kind of things that you encounter during the course of implementation. And as a responsible, and I emphasize the word responsible sector, we are reacting to it in a sustainable way and in a way that is not compromising on either of the aspects. It's not nature or development, it's both. So that is one aspect that we are looking at. The second one which I want to especially emphasize on, and until a couple of years back this was under the wraps, now we are seeing a lot of prominence being given to it, is on the land issue. India is a land of opportunities, pun intended. But for us in the solar sector, after I don't use the word used or overused the land that is existing which is arid and which is existing for projects. Now we are starting to face the land issues in the country. So the concept of co-locating solar generation with agriculture is something that is slowly gaining prominence. On one hand, it might be looked upon as you have an agriculture land and you use it to have solar and it becomes viable, the land use ratio is good and your land issue is solved. The farmer issues are solved. They are part and parcel of your fight against climate change. On the other hand, you have an arid land, you have a land which is uncultivable before, and now you are using that to, not grow food crops or other crops, but at least the ornamental crops. So this is, in my opinion, a paradigm shift from where we started, how we saw solar energy as a generation source, and how we are seeing it now. It is both a coincidence and I would say on a different set of expectations. Our emphasis has always been more on the utility scale and large scale plants, while the very virtue of solar is distributed and it can be produced where you are consuming. But on the utility scale side, I think this is what we are trying to address. I chair the working group of renewables in agriculture in IRENA Coalition for Action, and around 38 countries have now come together to pledge for it. Our own ministry has formed a working committee on agrivoltaics. So yeah, from the supply chain side, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, better late than never. But on the implementation side, I do see rays of hope, literally and figuratively both.
Well, that's good to hear. But before I let you go, maybe, given your background in the sort of developer side of the business, what is it that you think that developers need from investors like Puneet to sort of mainstream responsible energy investment?
I mean, a direct answer for that would be they don't need technically anything more. Already in the framework of the investment infrastructure that is there, including NIIF, it is mandatory. And to begin with, any...
Can I just qualify my question? Yeah. So NIIF, we know, are sort of probably leaders in this, but other investors who are not thinking about it so seriously.
Sure. So by and large, fortunately, most of the investors are thinking about it. But when I see the trend of investment coming into India, renewables is a 100% FDI sector. We have had a healthy mix of institutional investors, sovereign funds, indigenous funds from different countries, including India there. More or less, most of them did have, if not a generic, but a very strict framework for these things. But coming of the age, I think if it can be integrated more into the value of the returns that come from the projects. That is one way I look at from the investor's perspective. Again, I am all for investors not giving a free hand to developers, and developers strictly adhering to investor frameworks and guidelines. But there's a healthy pattern, I should say, in the last 4 years. I categorize the discussion on responsible renewable energy in 2 timelines. One is before GIB and one is after GIB. So before GIB, the narrative was mostly on, okay, solar is there, it itself is sustainable, you are contributing to the carbon mitigation, climate change mitigation. Now post GIB, now there are additional checks and balances that are there in the investing ecosystem that they are there. And that is good for the sector, not only for solar. Now I'm looking at, the budget has given a green light for pumped hydro policy, gigawatt scale storage projects. So all of them will definitely fall under this ambit, and you cannot take solar from this picture away.
Thank you, Subha. Vivek, what do you think from your perspective? You're now with BCG, you've had plenty of, many years of experience working in this field. What do you think are some of the bottlenecks in mobilizing capital? Not so much in sort of deploying it, but in mobilizing capital towards not just renewable energy, but responsible renewable energy investment.
No, of course, I think I'll build up from what my co-panelists suggested. I think there are still a few bottlenecks, and that's why we were asking these questions in the morning and what we are looking at today. If we just zoom back a little bit, money started becoming greener mostly after the Paris Agreement, and everybody was trying to say, okay, maybe there is a need for transition finance, and we need to move out and invest into more greener ways of producing energy, using energy, consuming stuff and all. And this kept happening across the board, both from a policy context and a private investor point of view. And suddenly you see a plethora of all kinds of pledges and platforms and movements coming out, including, say, the science-based targets for financial institutions, or the Net Zero Banking Alliance, or GFANs, you name it, everything's out there. What all of these things have done is they have really focused more on rehashing the portfolio in a way that, okay, maybe we'll take targets by, say, 2025, we'll not invest in coal. By 2027, we'll not invest in oil and gas. And maybe by 2030, we'll not do chemicals and stuff. But for all of these initiatives, investing into RE and renewable energy became more like a benign solution, where we said, okay, maybe we'll have a lesser burden or a lesser devil at play if we channelize all the investments here. But that's where the missing out of the environmental and social impacts of RE came in. And this is the first bottleneck which I wanted to highlight, which is the awareness part. You know, everybody has their own frameworks and due diligence criteria and different ways to make investments, but the social and environmental impacts of RE are not there. People are not aware. They still feel investing into RE is like a lesser devil benign solution. So there is work that needs to be done in creating that awareness, and the Responsible RE initiative is doing that. What this also translates it into is there are so many complex framings and mechanisms, and you look at ESG, there are hundreds of ratings and frameworks and disclosure guidelines, and there are independent agencies who do all of this. So for an investor, how do you really tackle these different aspects, right? People are just doing their own solutions, their own structure, their own methods, because probably what's available off the shelf doesn't work. So when you do these frameworks, how do you simplify across the board? How do you make it a little more harmonizing, if I can say, to cover some of these environmental and social aspects of it? But then the third bottleneck is the lack of data and the context, right? We heard in the morning as well. What does it really mean to really make responsible RE investments? Is it the land use change which he was talking about? We just probably never thought that we'll run out of land for the renewable energy investment. So is that a conflict? Is there a context to that? Is there a data point for some of those aspects? So how do you bring in more of that data contextual aspects of it? And then really look at the balance between short-termism and the longer-term goal, because sometimes including these additional nuances, getting more social impact assessments done, environmental impact assessments done, probably excluding a few projects will not reflect into short-term gains and benefits, right? So how do you move away from that mindset to a more longer-term vision? And that's the third. That's a fourth kind of bottleneck which we were looking at. So yeah, this is what we've been experiencing, and I hope it kind of brings a perspective.
Yeah, I mean, harmonization is always a challenge, I think, not just for this sector. I mean, we've been seeing it for decades now, how do you harmonize standards across the board? That is a big challenge. But I want to turn to Bhargavi now. Sorry, Bhargavi, you've been quiet so far, but that's not because we don't want to hear what you have to say. I think you have great experience in sort of the intersection of law, governance, policy. So I'd like to hear from your vantage point, working with civil society and holding large financial institutions, including DFIs like BII to account. What do you think needs to shift in the way investing happens in this sector? And I'd like you to maybe just think a little bit about how we can make this transition more just from a societal point of view.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I think we all need to go back to the fact that RE projects had been removed from the purview of environmental clearance and EIAs. This was challenged way back in 2012 at the National Green Tribunal, and the National Green Tribunal directed the MOEF and CC to revisit that decision. But that has not been done, so that needs to be pushed, and we need to get RE projects back in the purview of EC and EIAs. Because that is the only way that it is open to public review. Without public review, I think these projects are not going to be viable in the long run. The next thing is, I think we need to make sure local communities are part of it, because we spoke about land. Although we have the 2013 LAR Act, everywhere land is being taken under lease, or local state laws, land laws were reformed to aid RE projects. And that has not been fair on local communities. So we need to give people an option of the LAR Act, so that if they want to sell and resettle, then it's a fair process. The third thing is about the siting of the projects itself. Most of the projects where RE projects have come up are areas which are already very low in all the indicators. Take Pavagada, for instance. Take Koppal, for instance. The next project, big project that's coming up is in Koppal. It's already way down in the global hunger index and maternal mortality, infant mortality, all of that. And we are pushing this community into deep intergenerational poverty because the lease amount of 21,000 rupees per acre per annum is not going to sustain these communities. There is no food at the household level. Girl children are being pulled out of school. Child marriage is happening. Human trafficking has started in these areas. And that again is going to bear the brunt on the girl child because she's not ready for a reproductive life cycle, and we're going to have long-term issues of infant mortality and maternal mortality. So we need to think on those terms. And we also need to ensure that we are not installing RE projects in the commons. Pavagada, Reva, wherever you go, you see that most of the commons have been appropriated. It is sitting on lake beds, it is sitting on river beds, it is sitting on grazing pastures, and this has displaced local livelihoods. And these are communities who have no other alternatives. It is the agro-pastoral livelihoods. So now in the process of saying no to coal and installing RE, the north and the northeast of India, we're going to have a bunch of communities who will be pushed out of coal. And in the south and the southwest, we're going to have another bunch of people who are going to be pushed out of their livelihoods because of RE. And we don't have an alternate plan in place for them. And looking at the skills, there are very few skill building centers across the country. Most of the Vayu Mitra, Varun Mitra projects are happening in cities and they're not accessible to rural people. And look at the employment itself. Pavagada, which originally had some 4,000 people working there, today has some 1,500 people, of which only 800 are on a permanent payroll. So the RE sector doesn't really create so many permanent jobs. So we need to look at those aspects as well. And public review, like I said, is very important because it is only then that we can fix the nuts and bolts of the entire thing. And the last thing I would like to say is it has to be in consonance with the public trust doctrine, the intergenerational principle, equity principle, then the precautionary principle, all those principles of environmental jurisprudence have to be borne in mind. And financiers have to do some due diligence at the land level, at the community level, because that is very, very important. And non-conventional energy is a subject of the panchayats. The 11th and the 12th schedules very clearly mention that, but unfortunately local governments have been kept out of this entire process. We've created parastatals, and parastatals cannot be held accountable at all. So the entire public consultation processes happen online and very tokenistic. So local governments have no say in the matter. And this is a subject of the local government. So we have to bring them on board. Only when, all these boxes are ticked, I think it is going to be a good and a fair transition. And given that what the country woke up to the Adani scandal, I think we have to be very, very cautious. And probably many of you are already aware that there is a Columbia University study which shows that solar irradiation is going to reduce in the southwest Indian belt. So if we are investing so much money there, what's going to happen to that? If we are not going to be able to make that much amount of energy, will it be another project where, a few years back, in the name of Jatropa biofuels, so much of money was invested and so much saplings and other things were grown on people's farming lands, and one fine day they just shut shop and they all move to Africa. Are we going to do that with this as well? So these are questions that need to be answered, and I also think that financiers, developers need to engage with civil society, local civil society, academia, local community, and local governments. Only when everybody come to the table, we'll be able to make this a just and a fair transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhargavi, for those very, very sobering comments. I think, brings us back to reality. Puneet, can I ask you to, if possible, to respond to the challenges that Bhargavi has laid out?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think so, some of them are valid challenges, and there are no perfect answers for these. Some of these situations will continue to evolve. In terms of, today, yes, the consultations may happen on a limited basis, some of these things continue to happen. But I think it's still like it's an evolving situation. Still, I think it's an evolving situation. We are trying to kind of work on some of these issues through community development programs and ensuring that, most of our projects, at least whatever semi-skilled jobs are there, are going to the local public today. And, while some of these issues may appear to be social, for any developer or a financier or an investor, these are also fundamental business continuity risk. That wherever the local community is not really, in sync with what's happening at the project level, you will see regular recurring thefts, of things, people take away modules, people take away wires, all of those things keep happening. So it anyways needs to be a very ecosystem-driven approach. I think most developers recognize that today. And that's why I think it's important that, while one lens is there of the social angle, it's a very integral business continuity risk which you are seeing, right? And people are recognizing that today. On the land side, I think the numbers can change. Today it's more a willing buyer, willing seller basis. The transaction take place, it's dependent upon, some land aggregator who's supporting you through some of these processes. And yes, my sense is, things are going to improve gradually as people become more and more aware about these things. So I think that's where we are.
Bhargavi, do you have any examples of, good practice, maybe not just across the world as well? I mean, you mentioned the work that has been done in the US, but, are there examples that we could learn from? Because it is a slow process. I don't think we have the time to sort of, we don't have the luxury of time, to be honest. And the kind of things that you have raised are deep-rooted. So I don't know if you can share some examples of good practice that...
Yeah, I think there are enough examples from Europe where agro-pastoral livelihoods coexist with this. And it's also very important we ensure water security and, ensure soil protection. Because once the landscape is leveled, it is going to harden the soil, and in a lease period of 28, 30 years, that soil is going to completely degrade. So we need to take precautions for that. I am told that the KUSUM project offered by the government is doing pretty well in some areas. So that could be a good example, because apparently the microclimate created by the horticultural plants growing in and around the solar panels creates efficiency for the panel itself, and that microclimate is also good for the horticulture plants, and the harvest is good. So maybe those are little things that we could try and see if it can be implemented. And with respect to land that has been taken away from the pastoral community, I think we need to find ways to, give them some kind of ID cards and checks and balances to ensure that there are no petty thefts, safety issues. There have been a lot of accidents in all these areas, Pavagada, Reva, and all of them. So we need to ensure some safety, at the same time ensure these livelihoods can coexist. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Well, at least there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose. Just switching gears a bit, and then maybe after this we can open up for questions if there are any from the audience. I just wanted to ask Vivek, do you think there is some sort of bottleneck or in innovation in the financial sector? You referred to this briefly, so just please expand on that. That prevents the RE sector from achieving scale, and especially taking into consideration the kind of issues Bhargavi has raised.
Right. No, I think there is hope, and I'll probably add in terms of how that bottleneck in the financial sector can be looked at to drive really scalable, responsible RE solutions. And so should we be thinking of like a JETP, Just Energy Transitions Partnership equivalent, kind of a platform, or should we be looking at some kind of a, India's presidency is there for G20, so maybe a G20 fund on responsible investments or something. But these are all wish list kind of solutions. What I'm really seeing on ground is how programs are being designed to take this into consideration. So for example, when you look at any of the grid connected RE solutions, it's usually at a place which is far off, and it's affecting the indigenous communities or people who do not have much access. But then the power which is generated is transferred back to the cities or some other places, and the very people whose land or livelihoods have been displaced, they do not have access to those kind of measures. So what Nepal is doing, for example, is, with a terrain like Nepal where you have different pockets which are not connected to the grid, and they always kind of keep breaking down. They've been designing programs where they engage with a literal sense of sweat equity, where they look at the indigenous people, they bring in the local communities, involve them into the projects, make them as equity partners, get the labor and livelihoods coming out of that, and plus they have a share on the power that's been generated and stuff. So these kind of innovations really work well. There are a lot of blended finance facilities coming up from World Bank and the likes. So these also have their own set of environmental and social criteria to be met and stuff. So yeah.
If I may add, we have I agree mostly with the conflicts and the situation on ground that was outlined here. And as an industry body, we are privy to some of them. So to address them effectively, 22nd of this month, we are launching India Agri-PV Alliance here in Delhi. So this is an alliance that is consisting of not only the solar developers or manufacturers, but the farmers, civil societies, local communities, financing institutions, NBFCs, cooperatives, and the local governments. So we are dedicatedly forming a working committee under this alliance that will study the impact of renewables in the local communities and the aspect of inclusivity in the sector. Because we are a very strong proponent that solar energy in general, in specific, and renewables in general have the potential to uplift the socio-economic conditions. If they are doing otherwise, then we are not doing it right. So what is the situation on ground is privy to us. How to address it, we need minds to come together. There was a suggestion we also got that civil societies and local communities should also be involved. So we are trying to address that. In the first year, we are going to shortlist 2 states and shortlist specific regions in these states, and then do a deep dive approach into these regions, and then come up with solutions. The intent is very clear, from top to bottom, from the government side, from the association side, from the industry side, everything is clear. It's just that by the time the information passes from the grassroots to the top, we are either losing time, resources or efforts. That is something that we are trying to address.
That's very good to hear. And I think speed is of the essence here. So, Swami, do you have any comments to make on sort of some of the social aspects before we open up for questions?
That's right, because some of our investments where BI has invested with the local developers, we have been putting up skill development centers, and the focus of the skill development centers is to impart new skills to the local unemployed youths, and also with the equal focus of involving women from that region. But we have had our experiences where culturally it has been difficult, especially in states like Rajasthan or even Annapurna, where we could not attract enough women to come and participate. But we have been working on that.
Yes, thank you. I saw one hand raised over there, so please. Saksha?
My name is Winfried Damm from GIZ, the German Development Corporation, and I have basically two questions. One thing, please follow me. My math gives me that we need about 50 gigawatts of additional renewables per year. And if you add green hydrogen and phasing down or even out of coal, we might need even 100 gigawatt renewable every year additionally. Would you follow this calculation to achieve India's goals of 500 gigawatt non-fossil? And if that is the case, we have to really scale up all our joint efforts to achieve that. And it's required to get there to come up later on to 2070 decarbonization. And while talking about the social impact, why don't we talk a little bit more straight on what have been the worst case things we experience and what are the best practice examples which are out. And then learn from the best practice example and be cautious about the worst things which happen to avoid those things. And I think we need to be a little bit more frank in speaking out of those things. So these are my two questions.
Yeah, no, I can react to some of those things. Yes, the numbers, are, if not exactly those, but of course in that magnitude. At least to just read the government's target for 2030, we require at least 50, 60 gigawatts every year, from here on. It's a large number, and, even if we were to kind of, let's say achieve 50% of that number, given where we are today, I think we will really need to recalibrate ourselves the way we are thinking about it. That's quite the reality. I think everyone, in the industry recognizes that. Just in terms of, the best practices or anything, two, three things, have become, I think, increasingly visible where at least people are trying to actively work and where it makes economic sense as well. Because the industry also sees this as a business continuity risk. More than ESG or environmental social perspective. One thing has been the water conservation piece. So people are transitioning, all the developers are transitioning from water-based cleaning solutions to robotic waterless solutions, and that's one of the key changes which you see across the industry. The other piece has been around, providing adequate watering, in terms of doing the hydrology studies and everything from a drainage system design and everything, so that there is less flooding. And Bhargavi was talking about one example where there was actually recently a massive flooding which happened in that location, in that solar park. But most people recognize that because they're also losing generation. You know, it's being cash also is being lost. So while the motivation may be slightly different for the developers, they do recognize these things and they are working towards addressing these solutions.
Yeah, I also thought we need to increase rooftop. The focus has to be on rooftop because living in Bangalore, the fact that all the energy comes all the way from Pavagada to Bangalore, while the villages in Pavagada themselves lurk in darkness. And the irony of the whole thing is, you know, there are villages where you see women carrying firewood while they have solar parks just behind in their backyard. So, like Ritu mentioned, unless we ensure everybody has access to energy, we will not be, doing a fair transition. The second thing is CSR money needs to go back into these villages. At least all those developers who are in places like Reva, Pavagada and all of that, their CSR has to go back there. That's when it will help the local communities to a large extent.
Thank you very much. I can see a few hands have been told. We're almost out of time, so maybe we take one more question from the gentleman at the back there.
Thank you so much, Chair. My name is Kapil Narula, family with the UM and VPIO. My question is very simple. If we look that this is the ideal we want to reach, where are we at the moment in terms of ESG? In respect of various projects, if you average them out, what would be your estimate that we are at 10%, 20%, 30%, or the range?
As Chairman, I can say my personal view is we are at 30%. But maybe that's a good way to end this session. Subbu, how much percent? 30, 20. Barbary is realistic. But I think we are getting there. I think we are getting there. But it is a long haul. And some of these issues are so complex, especially on the social side. I think they are very complex, very deep-rooted. And it takes a lot of effort, willpower, hope, I guess. But with that, I just want to thank the panel. Good session. Thank you so much, everybody, for your very thoughtful interventions. And let's hope that we get where we want to. 20 becomes 100. But I don't know in how much time. But thank you so much.